to the Putting Your Business on the Map podcast. This is the podcast for land surveyors that own or want to own a small business. My name is Landon Blake. I am your podcast host. Let's dive right into today's episode. The title of today's episode is Why Are Land Surveyors Working for Starvation Wages? And how do we fix it? How do we fix that problem? Both as individuals and professionals. I'm going to tell you a quick opening story. It won't take very long. But it illustrates the problem that we have as a profession. I was at a surveying conference recently. Got invited to teach there. And I snuck into a class. Got to catch about half of a class. It was about the communication technologies that we use with RTK and RTN GNSS. It was given by one of the vendors. It was a great talk. I told the speaker a little bit later in the day that I learned more from him about radio technology in 20 minutes than I had in my 20-minute career. So it was a great talk. At one point during the talk, the speaker was explaining why you need to have a radio scanner if you're using RTK, and he let everybody know that you could pick up one of the scanners he was talking about for about 60. I think it was $69 or $89 on Amazon. And then he proceeded to spend 3 minutes going into detail on all the different bullet points that you could use to justify that purchase to your survey manager or your boss. And I remember I was sitting in the class and I was thinking to myself how completely ridiculous it was that this guy thought that he needed to give everybody a ton of reasons why they needed a $69 scanner so that they could convince their boss to make that purchase. Because at my company, I don't want to be asked about a $69 purchase, and neither does my partner Brian. We tell our folks, especially our field surveyors, like if you need a tool and it's less than $200, we don't want to hear about it. Just go buy it. Like, we trust you guys. Use good judgment, and we want you to be productive and efficient. So I was thinking, why is that? Why is our profession that way? Where not the way Brian and I are, but the other way, where you can't get your boss to buy a $69 or $89 tool that you need to be effective at your job. And I don't think surveyors are inherently penny pinchers. Some of us may be inherently penny pinchers, but I don't think we're not all born as penny pinchers. I think that a lot of that behavior is just driven by the business models that we run as land surveyors, especially smaller firms. If you're not part of a large civil survey firm, I think this is a major problem, and it's primarily driven by our business model. So I want to try and talk about that a little bit today. So we're going to focus on why land surveyors often undercharge for their professional services and what we might be able to do to start earning what we're worth. So I'm going to start, there's 3 sections. Section 1, I'm going to try and explain what I think the problem is and help you guys get an understanding of the problem. Section 2, I've got 7 things that I think cause this problem. We'll talk about each one briefly. Section 3, last section, we'll talk about 5 ways we can begin, I hope, as a profession to fix this problem. I think it's a problem we have as land surveyors that I don't see in some other professions. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the podcast. Well, let's go ahead and dive in to section 1. We want to understand this problem. What are starvation wages, and what are the basically the impacts of working for a starvation wage. What is a starvation wage? Let's see if we can define that at the top of this section. So here's a definition. A starvation wage is basically a wage that is too low to meet your basic needs, for you and your family, and to give you a reasonably comfortable lifestyle. Now that means different things to different people. So let me drill down on that definition a little bit. To me, that means you've got enough to pay your rent or your house payment, keep your utilities turned on, pay your car insurance, and keep food on your table, right? So it's not vacations out of state or out of the country. It's not eating out twice a week. It's not being able to afford a jet ski or an expensive hobby. It's just the basic stuff. I think there are a lot of surveyors who struggle to just do that. Forget about invest in their business or have a hobby, or take their wife out to eat for a nice dinner, once a month. Like, forget all that stuff. A lot of surveyors, especially self-employed or those that own small businesses, struggle just to avoid starvation. Now let me stop there because I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am not primarily a money motivated individual. My wife and I live what I think would be called a very modest middle class lifestyle. We don't vacation in Europe. My wife drives a RAV4, not a BMW. I drive a survey work truck. We live in a pretty modest 3-bedroom, 1,400 square foot home in South Stockton. I do not have a nice view out my front window. We've always lived pretty simple, just as a matter of choice. In the last few years, running the business have been hard financially. So I want to let you know I'm not primarily money motivated. I've never wanted to be rich or wealthy. That's never been a goal of mine. It still isn't. That's not why I started a business. And I tell people, if you want to be rich or wealthy, land surveying is probably not the right career choice. You should be a doctor or a lawyer, or maybe a business manager. Maybe you should manage a Walmart or something like that. Land surveying is probably not the right career choice. Now, having said that, I think most land surveyors should have a comfortable middle class living. And I think it should be comparable to other consulting professionals. So we should have basically the same standard of living that architects have, that civil engineers have, that structural engineers have, and even that lawyers have to some extent. I tell my people all the time, we should be getting paid like we're lawyers. We offer consulting services and technical advice like lawyers do. Oftentimes we have lawyers that call us to get help. We should be paid like lawyers. Now, we're not paid like lawyers all the time, but that's the goal. The goal is to get paid like we're attorneys. We're certainly at least like we're an architect. And I think civil engineers do it really bad. Land surveyors do a bad job of that. We typically get paid less than other professions. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why that is, but it's not good and it's not healthy for us. It's not good for us as land surveyors. It's not good for our families. I think our families suffer when they don't need to. And it's not good for the profession. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why. So if you can't afford to replace the bald tires on your work truck or purchase a $69 radio scanner from Amazon for your field crew, you are a victim of this problem. But I'll tell you, now you're a victim of the problem. You're also a part of the problem, though. See, we all, when we work for these low wages, we contribute to this problem, right? If more surveyors started to demand more of their actual market value, either as employees or as business owners, this problem would start to get solved. When we do this, when we work for starvation wages, what is this? How does this impact us? How does this impact our businesses, our families, our profession? I've got 4 or 5 things here. Number 1, it reduces motivation to enter the profession. If you can't make a reasonably comfortable middle-class living as a land surveyor, why be a land surveyor? There's a lot of other options available. So it keeps good people out of the profession. When we get people into the profession, it reduces the motivation for them to develop as professionals, to get licensed, to acquire the skills they need, because they're just not going to be compensated for fairly. We lose young talent to other professions. Now, I have started to see this trend reverse a little bit in the last 20 years because wages for surveyors are coming up. But a lot of smart young people become engineers or architects or lawyers and not land surveyors, and this is part of the reason why they do that. The other major problem the major impact this has is it lowers the quality of our consulting services. this can become a vicious cycle, and I think this is a large contributing factor. We don't charge enough for our services, and so because of that, in order to compete, you have to cut corners and provide. You just can't do as good of a job. You're not being paid to do as good of a job, and when clients see that, it damages the reputation of the profession. And the next time they go to hire a surveyor, they want to pay even less because they feel like they didn't get the value they paid for the first time, and so that can become a vicious cycle. So, how serious is this problem? I have a question here in my outline, and the question is, how low can you go? I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But before I do that, I want to let you know that when I told you earlier that we are part of this problem, each one of us, it's because this is really a problem that's enabled by group behavior, right? So this decision that individual land surveyors make to not charge enough money eventually becomes a part of a professional culture. It's deeply ingrained in our culture now, and so those small actions of individuals end up with having a much larger impact than they realize when you accumulate that. When you accumulate those decisions of hundreds or thousands of surveyors over decades to undercharge, we've created this really difficult situation. It's so bad I tell people you can't sell an honest boundary survey where I practice in California. So let me give you an example. I talked about this at a recent conference I was at. I'll try and keep this short, but a couple years ago it was winter and things were slow, and I got onto Yelp. I created an account on Yelp, and we put our company profile up there, and I decided to see just like how low did I have to drop my fees to get a residential lot survey in the Bay Area. The Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, is it's a couple hours drive from here, depending on traffic. It's one of the most expensive real estate markets in the United States, probably in the world. So there's a lot of work there. People buy older homes and then they remodel, or they demolish the home and they build a new home. So there's a lot of lot surveys that get done there. And so I just wanted to see, we needed the work to say, how low do I have to go? And so what I did is every couple of days, I was getting several calls a day for lot surveys. Once we put up our profile and I ran some ads, I was getting several calls a day. And so what I did is every couple days I would drop my price for a lot survey by $1,000. I can't remember where I started. I think I started in the $8,000 range, let's say. And so every day I would drop it $1,000. Every couple days I would drop it $1,000 to see at what point I would get somebody from Yelp in the Bay Area to bite. I finally stopped when I got to $2,000. I didn't get a single lot survey job from Yelp in the Bay Area. So what did that tell me? What that told me is the surveyors in the Bay Area, and there's a lot of them, there's a lot of small shops in the Bay Area that live off of this work. Apparently the going rate for a topo boundary in the Bay Area is less than $2,000. I know some of you are thinking, well, that doesn't sound unreasonable. If you're in Mississippi or Arkansas or Michigan or something, that you might think, oh, well, that sounds like a reasonable price. Okay, but you got to remember, this is the most expensive real estate market in the United States, potentially, except for maybe Manhattan. The cost of living over there is outrageous. And a lot of this land hasn't been surveyed in 100 years or 75 years, 50 years. I mean, they're tough boundary surveys to do the right way. I couldn't charge enough to pay for just my field crew time to get over there to do the initial field work and get back. Forget research, proposal, resolving the boundary, setting them on, and preparing the record of survey. I couldn't get $2,000. Lowering prices in that way, without a doubt, is the quickest way to bring in new clients. I don't have a doubt in my mind, if I'd have got my price low enough, I could have had 3 lot surveys a week in San Francisco. I don't know what that number was. I don't know if it was $500 or $800 or $1,200, but I know it was under $2,000. You can do that. I could have brought in as much work as I wanted from Yelp, but it's the wrong type of clients. And that work wouldn't have been profitable. And in the long run, I knew that was a failing long-term strategy. After about 2 weeks, I just turned off the Yelp ads. because I got tired of wasting time with the calls. So there is a better way to compete, and I'd like to talk about that. I think we'll make a note to do a future episode on that topic. What are effective ways to compete other than low price? And it has to do with how you provide value. A lot of it has to do with how you provide value. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about in this section is the difference between your hourly charge rate and your actual hourly wage. Sometimes surveyors don't, if you don't own a business, you may not understand that, so I want to explain it. So your actual hourly wage is what you pay yourself. That's the income that gets taxed on your paycheck and that goes into your bank account. Your charge rate is the rate you charge your client, and even if you're like us and you do mostly lump sum, you use your hourly charge rates as a rough way to get to the fee that the lowest fee you need to charge your client. As a general rule, in our type of professions, you need what they call a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 multiplier on your hourly wage to get to your charge rate. So I don't mind telling you, I pay myself $70 an hour. Some people are going to think that's high. Some people are going to think it's low. Depends on what part of the United States you're in. But that's what I pay myself. I'm not embarrassed to let you know that. $70 an hour. That's my hourly wage. That's my W-2 income. I need to be charging $140 to $210 an hour to make a reasonable profit margin with a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 multiplier. So if you want to know what your actual hourly wage is as a land surveyor, you have to take your total revenue minus your total expenses. Okay, that's what's left over. Okay, that's not your profit. Okay, that's your net revenue. Total revenue or gross revenue minus your total expenses gives you your net revenue, revenue after expenses. You divide that by the total number of hours you work, that gives you your actual hourly wage. Okay, so we'll do a PYB-OTM extra, and I'll get on the whiteboard and show you guys some of this. I've got a friend. He's a good guy. I like him. He's a good surveyor. He's told me before he makes about $250,000 a year, and that sounds like a lot of money, right? There's a lot of people that make $60,000 a year, $70,000 a year. So $250,000 a year sounds like a lot of money, but that's his gross revenue. He's paying for a truck. He's paying for an office. He's paying for all of his insurance. He's paying for all of his software. He's paying for all of his equipment. And the guy works 60 or 70 hours a week. I bet when you do all the math, he's paying himself $20 an hour to be a licensed land surveyor and a business owner. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Now, part of the reason that happens is because he doesn't understand that. He's not doing that math. He just sees the big number. He says, oh, I did great last year. I made $250,000 an hour. Yeah, but you only paid yourself $20 an hour by the time you do all the math. So we'll try and do a PYB-OTM extra and look at that. But that's what I mean, essentially, by starvation wages. You're not paying yourself even the market rate, what you would make if you went to work for an employer. And look, I don't make what I could make for a big civil engineering company. I know that. I could make more money working for a big civil engineering company. But I make close. I make within 75%. If you're working for 25 or 30% of what you could get on the job market as a business owner, that's a problem. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that to ourselves. All right, we're going to get into the next section here. I'm going to take a break. But the next section, section 2, is I'm going to tell you what I think the 7 causes are of this propensity or this tendency that land surveyors have to work for starvation wages. I'll explain what those, you need to understand that if we're going to fix it, we got to understand what causes it. So I'll do that next. What are the 7 causes of this tendency that land surveyors have to undercharge for their services? I'm going to go through them one at a time. Here's number 1. We just love land surveying. We do. We love what we do. I love what we do. I'm passionate about it. I think I would have been good at a lot of other jobs, so I don't want to overstate this. But in my fantasy world, Landon Blake was always destined to be a land surveyor. It just fits me. I like to be outdoors. I like science and technology. I like history. I like to draw. I wonder sometimes, like, this is maybe what I was meant to do, right? Now, I don't think that's true. I think I would have been good at a lot of different potential jobs. This is just what I happen to fall into. But I love it. I mean, I love what I do for work. I love going to work every day. That can be a problem. Like, for one thing, it can lead to an unhealthy work-life balance. We'll save that topic for a future episode. The more corrosive impact of this is it means that we will do surveying for what it actually costs or below what it costs us before we consider alternatives. And that's not healthy. It's not healthy. It's a huge problem. And I think this is the number one reason why it happens. It happens because we will lose money to be surveying. We would rather lose money and survey than make money and do something else. And part of how we fix this is, and we'll talk about this later, but we have to understand what is our BATNA, or our best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In other words, you got to understand if you can't make enough money as a land surveyor, what is your best next alternative? You need to think about that, and then you need to be ready to take that alternative if you can't make it as a land surveyor. I think about it a lot, and so I'll use myself as an example. So if I can't make a reasonable profit at owning a small survey business, I need to do some other things. What are some other things I could do? I could do training. I could train other surveyors, other professionals. I could do exam prep. I could develop software. I'm good at software. I like software. I could create software for surveyors and engineers and GIS professionals. I could work as a manager or a leader in a different business organization. I have that skill set, I think. I could work to help clients with land use planning, with permitting and entitlements. I could do work with water rights. I could potentially work in a law office, depending on the type of legal practice. I have a lot of alternatives. A lot of those alternatives would pay pretty good. So I have to always evaluate, am I able to make enough money, a reasonable amount of money as a land surveyor? Do I make enough money surveying so that it doesn't make sense to pursue those other alternatives, right? And I think every surveyor needs to understand what their potential alternatives are. Reason number 2 for this problem in our profession is we just lack business expertise. And I talk about this a little bit. I talk about it on some of our other episodes. Let me go find out what episode that is real quick. So I did an episode where I talked about the difference between business expertise and domain expertise. And that's essentially, part of the problem is we're a lot of us are really good surveyors, but we're horrible business people. And so that contributes to this problem. Let me see here. It is episode 22. So if you haven't listened to that, you can go check it out. So we're not good business people. And we're worse than civil engineers. I think there's a lot of civil engineers that aren't good business people either, but they're better business people than most surveyors. So even grading on a curve, we're not even as good as civil engineers. We may be the worst business people of all the professional consultants that I interact with. Doesn't mean you're not a good surveyor. You might be a great surveyor. You might be a great boundary surveyor, or a great topo surveyor, or a great construction surveyor, but you're probably not a good business person. You lack skills in business. You don't know how to manage. You don't know how to organize. You don't know how to price. You don't know how to do marketing. You don't know how to do sales. You don't know how to manage your finances. That's a lot of us. That was me 5 years ago, without a doubt. And because we're not good business people, we just don't know. We don't even know how to figure out what we need to charge our clients to make a reasonable living. And then if we're even smart enough to do that math, and we're like, okay, this is what I need to charge, we don't know how to get to the point where we can charge those fees because we don't know how to differentiate. We don't know how to specialize. We don't know how to market. We don't know how to have a good brand. Because this is a problem that we have. Third reason why we don't charge enough, why we consistently undercharge, is we subsidize our clients. I don't know why we do it, but we do. I've done it. I talked about before on the podcast, I had an engineering client. I think I did $100,000 of free work for them over a year. It was a horrible decision that I made as a business owner. How do we subsidize our clients? We absorb costs that should be passed on to them. Right? We do research and analysis that we don't charge them for. We make revisions to deliverables that we don't charge them for. When they ask us to do scopes that are out of tasks that are out of scope, we do that, and we don't ask to get paid for it. I'll try and remember to do a PYB-OTM extra that talks about this. I had an example of this come up on a recent project where the client asked us to do something that was clearly out of scope, and we told them it was out of scope. And we'd already done several out of scope things for this particular client because it was a big project and they were a good client, but they were coming back again to ask for another thing that was out of scope. And I finally had to draw a line, and I told them, I am not doing this unless you pay for it. And they thought about it for a couple days, and they came back to me and they said, yeah, you're right, we need to pay for it. And they did. They paid us for it. So we'll do a PYB-OTM extra to help you answer this question. Is this out of scope task that you're being asked to perform, is it worth being paid for? There's a really effective way you can answer that question with your client. The other way that we subsidize our clients is we just do a ton of coordination. We coordinate with the title companies, with government agencies, with the design teams, with the neighbors, with other interested parties. We talk to all those people. We answer their questions. We give them emotional support. We bird dog them to make sure they're doing their job. We don't charge the client for that time. And we should. Lawyers charge for that. Program managers charge for it. Construction managers charge for it. For some reason, land surveyors don't feel like they need to charge for it. It's one of the reasons why I know a lot of surveyors lose money on small land development projects. We're actually going to talk about that this week, I think, on Tuesday on the business mentoring group I put together called Charting the Northwest Passage. So check that out if you haven't done that. The fourth reason we work for starvation wages is we let our clients push us around. And clients will do it. Clients will do it if you let them. Not all clients, but there are a large portion of your clients. They will push you around. One of the very first clients we had at RH was a business owner and a rookie land developer, and I took a subdivision job for him, and he would bully me. In fact, I ended up terminating the relationship with him, but when we were getting to that point when things were kind of coming to a head, he threatened me, he turned me into the board, he called people at my local professional association to complain about the fact that I wouldn't do a bunch of extra work for him for free. He was a nightmare, and he was a bully. And I had to go through a big investigation with our state licensing board. My name was cleared eventually, but it was a deal. Your clients will bully you, and they will push you around. So we need to set reasonable boundaries with our clients. We can't be afraid to tell them no. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but we can't be afraid to tell our clients no. I'm not going to do that, or this is a really bad idea for you, don't do this, right? Or you shouldn't handle things this way, here's a better way to handle it. You got to be able to have those conversations with your client. That is part of a healthy client-consultant relationship. You can't be afraid of your client, and you can't be afraid to tell them the truth. And sometimes the truth is, if you want me to do a good job, you need to pay me for what you're asking me to do, because that's the truth, and they need to be told sometimes that. I'll give you an example. I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I think it was one of the very first episodes. I worked for a civil engineer. He was scared to death of his primary client. He worked for a land developer, and that land developer was 90% or 95% of the revenue for his 20-person engineering firm. That was a really unhealthy situation for him to be in. And because I was doing a lot of work for him, it was an unhealthy situation for me to be in. And that client pushed him around. His client would push him around, and then he would come push me around. And he was scared to death of that client because he was doing way too much work for one client. I've told, this is a little bit of a side note, but I've told clients in meetings, I would like to take more of your work, but at this point, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to let you become 70% of my company revenue. And I've had clients that just did not understand that. They're like, yeah, but we want to hand you more work. And I have to say, I know, but I don't have a way I can reasonably scale up to take that work from you in an appropriate time frame. And I cannot let you become 70 or 80 or 90% of my revenue. And they say, why? Why is that a problem? And I say, because that creates an unhealthy dynamic between a consultant and a client. And I've learned that lesson the hard way, and I'm not going to repeat the mistake. The fifth reason that we chronically undercharge for our services is because we are poor at business administration and cash flow management. Every surveyor I know does a horrible job at cash flow management. And what is that? What's the consequence of that? And cash flow management means you don't have enough money in the bank when you need to pay your bills. I talked about that in one of the early episodes. Let me go see which one it was. Let's see. Episode 4. I talked about it early because it's one of the most important things about running a survey business. So we don't do a good job at managing cash flow. If you're not sure what that means, go check out episode 4. Because we don't do a good job of managing our cash flow, what happens is we take jobs that we shouldn't take because we urgently need to get the cash in the door. And I've done it. I've done it more than once. I've always regretted it. It's almost always a horrible decision. The answer isn't to take jobs that aren't a good fit. The answer is do better cash flow management so you can be more selective about the types of projects you take on and the type of clients you work for. I'm just going to make a note here. This isn't all our fault. A lot of our clients demand unreasonable payment terms, and we need to stop letting them do that. We need to put our foot down. I will tell you, at RH, we regularly turn down work, like several times a year. We will turn down work, usually for a large civil engineering firm, because they have crazy, unreasonable payment terms, or they want us to sign crazy, unreasonable indemnification language in their contract, and we just won't do it. I have turned down hundreds of thousands of dollars of potential work because we couldn't get reasonable contract terms or reasonable payment terms. This just happened to us. We had a national civil engineering firm reach out to us to get help with the project. They needed help with the project. It was a state they didn't have a license in that I'm licensed in, and they didn't have the bandwidth on their team, and they wanted us to do somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 worth of work, depending on the scope that the client selected. But they wanted me to do paid when paid. And I kept telling the project manager at the engineering company, I can't do paid when paid. I said, I send you my invoice. It takes you a month to look at it. You finally look at it, send it to your billing department. It takes them a month to look at it. They send it to the client. It takes the client a month to look at it. They approve it. It takes you 2 weeks to get the money back from the client. Then it takes you another month to pay me. I said, I'm 5 to 6 months out. And I didn't know this engineering company. They'd been referred to us by a friend. I told them, I said, I don't know you. Like, I don't know. And they were upset. They were upset that I wouldn't take their payment terms. And I said, I don't know why you're upset. I don't know you. I've never worked with you before. You're not an existing client. You show up at my front door. You're a stranger. And you want me to roll you a $300,000 line of credit for 6 months. I said, that's crazy, and I'm not going to do it. I said, I've been with my business bank for I don't know how long. Those people know me on a first name basis. I could just stroll in there tomorrow and walk out with a $300,000 line of credit for 6 months. If I can't get my bank to do that for me, why would I do that for a stranger? Just because you're an engineering company? On a side note, even if they were an existing client and I'd done work for them before, I still wouldn't roll them a $300,000 line of credit for 6 months. My small business cannot afford that. It will bankrupt us. I don't know why clients ask us to do it, and I don't know why surveyors do it. What happens is you roll that loan, because that's what it is, it's a loan, and then you get tight on your cash flow, and you take jobs you shouldn't take because you need to pay your electricity bill. And your client that is forcing you to finance their project has put you in that situation. So you got to be able to turn down work that doesn't have bad payment terms. That's part of it. All right, reason number 6. Why do we work for starvation wages? Reason number 6 is it's the clients we serve, the type of clients. A lot of small surveying companies are working for homeowners. Homeowners are horrible clients. Almost all of them. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions to that. I don't know, it's 1 out of 50 maybe. I've occasionally worked for some homeowners that were reasonable clients, but it's maybe happened 3 times in 5 years. So why are homeowners horrible clients? We could do a whole PYB-OTM extra on this, or an whole episode even. But I'm going to give you the short list. You got to hold their hands. They got a lot of questions. They're going to pester you about stuff. They don't have the resources to pay for a quality boundary survey. They just don't. Nobody has that kind of money in the bank. Most homeowners, almost nobody. It's the market most small surveyors work in, so there's a ton of competition. And those surveyors are willing to cut prices. I talked about that earlier with my example from the Bay Area. For all those reasons, homeowners are not good clients. And that is the market that most small survey companies are in. This is part of the reason why we work for starvation wages. And I want to point out, if you know anything about economics, it's not just that we get in this race to the bottom for lot surveys. It's that as the price of lot surveys go down, that pulls down the prices for the next level up, right? So small commercial surveys, small subdivisions, lot line adjustments, right? As the prices of lot surveys come down, it's pulling on the pricing of that next level up. So it harms the whole industry. Now I want to point out on a side here. I drove by a business a few months ago. I can't remember where it was. I think it was in Modesto, which is a town not far from here. And there's a plumber there. This is a plumbing company. And they do residential and commercial work. This plumbing company had a beautiful, brand new 2,500 square foot building, and there were 8 brand new plumbing vans in their parking lot. I mean, it was a $3 million building, probably, maybe a $4 million building. And I don't know, there was $750,000 or $1 million worth of brand new plumbing vans. And I thought to myself, that you would never see a survey company with that kind of building and that kind of new work vehicles. And here's part of the reason why I think that is. You can be a profitable plumber or a profitable HVAC company and work for homeowners. Do you know why? Because most of those people don't love plumbing or HVAC like surveyors love surveying. And I'm not saying they don't like it. They may like it. They might even enjoy it a little bit. But they're not passionate about it like we are. So see, they demand reasonable pricing from their clients, even if those clients are homeowners. But we don't do that. We will starve to death to do lot surveys as a profession, which is a problem. Now, if you're not working for homeowners, you're probably working for engineers, and they are almost as bad. Right? I talked about some of the reasons why. I gave you that example. But engineers are almost as bad as homeowners. They don't respect our expertise, most of them. They're primarily concerned about obtaining a low price, and they demand things that they don't pay for. Every civil engineer I've worked for, every single one has asked for things they didn't pay for in the scope. Even engineers I like. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. This is a true story. I was at a networking event for a real estate industry association, and I happened to bump into a couple civil engineers from one of the larger civil engineering firms in the Sacramento area, Sacramento, California. This was a networking event in Sacramento, and I got to visit a little bit. Everybody was having a glass of wine. I brought my wife because she's a social butterfly. I started talking to this civil engineer, licensed PE, professional engineer from this engineering company. And within the first, I told her, just introduced ourselves. What do you do? She told me what she does. I told her I'm a land surveyor. One of the very first things out of her mouth, I kid you not, this was in the first 120 seconds. She looked at me and said, "How much would you price a 5-acre boundary topo for in the Sacramento area?" She didn't ask me, what do you like about land surveying? What do you specialize in? How do you provide good value for clients? What's your sales pitch? What challenges do you think you can help me solve? What is it you think that most engineers fail to understand about land surveying? All those would have been great questions. Her very first question went immediately to price. And here's the worst part. Not only was it a question about how cheap I could be, but she wanted a unit cost. Like every 5-acre parcel is the same, which if you're a land surveyor, that isn't true. What a great example of why civil engineers and other design engineers are horrible clients. I mean, and I think civil engineers are the worst. Architects are pretty bad, but civil engineers might be worse than architects. Here's the last reason. This is number 7. The last reason why we consistently work for less money than we're worth. And that's because we give away the value of our expertise. We do it all the time. I did it a ton the first few years I was in business. I've had to learn not to do it. My partner Brian has helped me with that. He's always telling me, you give too much away for free, you give too much away for free, you give too much away for free. It's because I like what I do. I'm passionate about it, and I want to help other people. I've had to learn to dial that way back. As land surveyors, we give a ton of value away in our expertise before a contract is even executed or a deposit or retainer has been paid. We'll go do a bunch of research, we'll engage in a bunch of needs discovery, we'll craft project approaches, we'll tinker with the scope and the fee, we'll take stuff out, we'll put stuff in, we'll rerun the numbers. We're giving away a ton of value when we do that. And we have to stop doing it. We've got to learn to stop doing that as a profession. I mentioned this before. Not only do we give a ton of value away before the contract's executed, but then when we get under contract, we do a ton of problem solving and coordination that never gets billed to the client. I mentioned before, that's why most surveyors lose money on small subdivisions. I'm going to tell you a quick example. It's a true story. I had a client. They hired me to do a land development. It was right outside of Yosemite National Park. And they wanted to do, they were going to develop a small resort. And so we got hired initially to do a boundary survey and some like planning level orthophotography and to prepare a site plan, which we did. And we worked with them, prepare a site plan. Did a survey, prepared a site plan. And they got into the entitlement process. And they were just calling 3 times a week with all sorts of questions. You know, they weren't from California, and they'd never done development here, and they bought this parcel and got in a little over their head. And they were always on the phone. They were asking me about CEQA. They were asking me about how to get the well permitted with environmental health. They were asking me about how to upgrade and connect the utility service. They were asking me about how they got a billboard next to Highway 120. And I mean, And this was fairly early on in the history of RH, and I did a ton of that work and didn't charge them. I finally got to the point where I told them, hey, I need you to send me a retainer, and I need to start billing you for all of these phone calls and all this advice and help that you need. I told them I'm more than willing to help you figure out your utility service and get you through environmental health and help you find a good civil engineer and review the civil engineer's proposal and make sure you get a good set of grading plans and take you through the CEQA process with the county. I said, we can do all that. I said, but you have to pay me. I'm going to bill you T&M. And they asked me, could you give us some ballpark prices? And I gave them some ballpark. Here's what I think it might cost. You know what? They hung up the phone and they never called me back, ever. That is a client that would have bled me dry. They would have just kept taking and 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 never felt any obligation to pay me. At some point, I wasn't their land surveyor anymore. I was their project manager. I was managing all the aspects of that development project for them. It wasn't just the survey anymore. And when I demanded to be paid, just like an architect or a civil engineer or an attorney would be, they told me no. They refused to do it. The good news is I haven't lost any more money working for that client. Right now, it's been a couple years. They still don't have their project approved. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that they don't have their project. If they'd hired me, their project would probably be approved and they'd be in construction. But they didn't want to pay for that. And I didn't feel obligated to give it to them. All right, so I'm going to end up splitting this into 2 episodes because what I want to talk about in the second part is, in part 2, we're going to talk about the 5 ways we can begin to fix this problem, this chronic problem we have with undercharging. Then we're going to talk about, do other professionals do this? And we're going to consider some examples from my own business. Do other professionals consistently undercharge and give away free value, or do they demand payment for value? And we'll look at some examples. And we'll talk briefly about some things that you might be able to do to help me and our profession start to turn this ship around, right? And to not to gouge our clients, but to get paid a fair price and to make a reasonable profit margin. So we'll talk about that. That'll be episode 33. I'll have to bump all the episodes down. We'll do that in episode 33. I'm looking forward to it. The next episode after that, episode 34, is going to be entitled 5 Questions You Should Ask to Qualify Business Development Leads. That'll be in our Finding Good Clients series. And then episode 35 will be Managing Organization's Liability with Good Project Documentation. So look forward to those. Thank you guys for listening to the podcast. Don't forget, you can support us on Patreon for just $10 a month. Makes a difference. Helps me pay for Carly. We'll catch you guys on part 2. As we close out the episode, we just want to give you guys a few reminders. First, we want to let you know where you can find the podcast episodes. The podcast home on the web is at my personal website, landonblake.com. If you head there and look under the Learn menu, you'll find a link for the podcast. That homepage for the podcast has all of the episodes. You can download those in MP3 format if you'd like, or read the show notes. You can also find the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon Music. So if those are your preferred, one of those is your preferred distribution channel, you can find the podcast there. We also want to let you guys know, if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, you can reach out to me, sunburn.surveyor@gmail.com. You can also send me questions, comments, thank yous, topic suggestions for the podcast. I regularly get that kind of feedback from listeners, and I dig it. I appreciate hearing from you guys, so I encourage you to do that. We also have a Patreon page. If you cruise over to Patreon, you can search for On Point Workshops, and you will find the podcast there. You can, for a small monthly donation, I believe right now it's $10 a month, you can support the podcast and get access to what we call PYB-OTM extras. So those are extra videos, short audio files, and even full episodes of the podcast. And that support on Patreon allows me to keep Carly around. Carly is the fantastic young lady that helps me edit the podcast and maintain the podcast website. We'd like to keep her around, so we appreciate your support on Patreon if you're able to do that. And thank you for being a listener.